our net also.
All right. Good evening. Welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Jessica from Greenlight, and along with the NYU Game Center, we are excited to host tonight's event with Sid Meier presenting his new book, Sid Meier's Memoir, A Life in Computer Games. He's going to be talking tonight with journalist David Ewalt, so you are in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Sid and David and the team at Norton for pulling this together, to the good folks at NYU Game Center for co-sponsoring and helping to get the word out, and to all of you for showing up. Though we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. So now just a couple of housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see and hear you. They can see that you're here though, and you can see a count of fellow attendees at the top of your Zoom screen. The location depends on what kind of device you're using. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. It's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and interact with fellow attendees. If you do have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program tonight. We are recording tonight's event, so look for video on our Greenlight Bookstore YouTube channel and audio on our podcast later on. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Sid Meier's Memoir, is available for sale at Greenlight Bookstore. You can order online and pick it up at either of our store locations or have it shipped anywhere in the country. I'll be pasting that buy link again a little bit later on. So if you care about supporting the careers of authors and creators and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. So our interviewer for this evening is David Ewalt. He's an award-winning journalist, author, and speaker who studies games and technology. He's the author of the books Defying Reality, the inside story of the virtual reality revolution, and of Dice and Men, the story of Dungeons and Dragons and the people who play it, both of which Dave launched with excellent events at Greenlight, I have to say. He's also a great friend and supporter of the bookstore since day one, and actually even before that, and one of the coolest game nerds you could ever hope to meet. So we're grateful to have him in the interview spot tonight. He's going to be speaking with our featured author, the revered Sid Meier himself. He's the creator of Civilization and has been honored with virtually every award in the video game industry. A member of the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Hall of Fame and founder of Firaxis Games, Meier lives in Hunt Valley, Maryland. His new book, Sid Meier's Memoir, is the story of an obsessive young computer enthusiast who helped launch a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's written with a lot of warmth and ironic humor as Meier takes readers through the genesis of his influential studio Microprose and recounts the development of landmark games from vintage classics like Pirates and Railroad Tycoon to Civilization and beyond. So Sid's going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then he'll be talking with Dave and with all of you. Sid, please take it away.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Yeah, I'd like to read just a little bit from the introduction to this book. Because it's amazing. It's amazing even to me. Some of these factoids. Pardon my glasses. Introduction. 1 billion hours. 1 billion hours ago, Neanderthals were making spearheads in the Stone Age. A billion hours from now, it will be the year 174 AD. With a billion hours to play with, you could make roughly 13,000 trips to Alpha Centauri and back at the speed of light. Or play back-to-back marathon of every Star Trek movie ever made for every person in New York twice. Or you could spend it all playing Civilization, so I'm told. 1 billion hours is a sort of number that is humbling to the point of incomprehensibility, and it's a wildly conservative estimate at that. The game distribution service Steam only began collecting player data in earnest within the last decade. And 1 billion is actually the number of hours played on Civilization 5, specifically from its release in 2010 up through 2016. A 6-year window into one game in a series so that, as of this printing, spans 29 years, 12 editions, not to mention expansion packs. To imagine all these hours devoted to all the Civ incarnations since 1991 is, well, it's incomprehensible. I wouldn't even want to try. What's more, any fair assessment of Civ's success would have to include all the other games I've worked on, Pirates, Railroad Tycoon, etc. Also, overlooked gems like CPU Bach and Sim Golf. What follows in this book is largely a chronological examination of all the games I've produced, from some that were successful, some that were never heard of. It's a thorough list, including some that were developed outside the traditional career model when you do things like just try to make money or get sued if you copy other people's ideas. Just as every sprawling empire can be traced back to a single settler, my reputation wasn't built in a day. And the truth is, I was once a young kid who didn't know there were any rules, making games out of not so original ideas for fun and, well, almost profit. Like most, but whether it took 1 billion lines of code, not an impossible estimate for all the Civ products combined, or less than 100, there's one thing every game in this book has in common. They are fundamentally comprised, as all games are, of interesting decisions. Like most definition, this one requires a little unpacking, but the most important takeaway is that it's a mindset that looks outward rather than inward. We are surrounded by decisions and therefore games in everything we do. Interesting might be the subject to personal taste to some degree, but the gift of agency, that is the ability of players to exert free will over their surroundings rather than just following a narrative, is what set games aside from other media, including books. Regardless of whether that agency is expressed through a computer, keyboard, tokens, physical movement, or entirely in the mind, without a player's input, there can be no game. Conversely, it takes only a single interaction to transform an observer into a participant and thus a player. So welcome to all our players. And David, thank you for being part of this.
Well, thank you very much, Sid. Greetings from downtown Brooklyn, where I can turn my head and literally see the NYU Game Center right out my window. I'm delighted that Greenlight has teamed up with the Game Center to host this conversation, and I'm even more delighted to talk to you, Sid, because you're not only a legend in the game industry, but in my own home. I checked my Steam statistics this afternoon, and I have 1,374 hours played in Civilization 6 alone.
I'll have to add that to the billion. So.
Okay. And well, you also have to add the other thousands of playing every other Civ game in the franchise: Sid Meier's Pirates, Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri, too many others to count. You know, those of you who are gamers in the audience will understand that these are not crazy numbers that I'm foisting. It's not unusual for a Civ fan to dedicate thousands of hours, because Sid's games are always famous for demanding one more turn, for making it impossible to stop playing. And they reward replaying. There's always a new adventure for you or a new story in the making. Sid's book, which is wonderful, shares some of his own adventures. It's a fantastic read, whether you're a prospective game designer or a current game designer, or even just a casual fan. And Sid, because you structured your book as kind of a chronological examination of your games, I thought maybe we'd do something similar here with our conversation. I want to ask you some questions that kind of arose from the book as I was reading about each game in your history, starting at the very beginning. So you get into your origin stories a little bit and how you started playing games. But one of the things I think probably a lot of people don't know about you is that you started programming games long before you were a professional, right? And one of your first games was this game Hostage Rescue that you wrote, and then brought home for your mom to play. Can you tell us a little bit about experience and like why having that moment of sharing this game with your family was so transformative for you?
Yeah, I think in those days, gamers were kind of looked down upon. I mean, it was a very new thing, and the whole idea of playing games and computers playing games was kind of people didn't buy it. Computers were these huge things in air-conditioned rooms that you brought your punch card deck to have your program run, or they were for banks balancing your checkbook or doing serious things. They weren't for games. And but I was been a gamer since I was a young kid, and studied computers in college. So the idea of computer games was something that I thought needed to happen. And So I put together a few games on my, the first computer I had was an Atari 800, and kind of had nobody to show them to, so I brought them home to my family, and you know, I've been working on this as a hobby. You know, this is something new. Gave it to my mom to play, and Hostage Rescue was a game with a bunch of helicopters on one side of the screen and the Ayatollah, the bad guy of the day, on the other side, and the helicopters would shoot missiles at the Ayatollah, and he'd shoot missiles back, and you know, I gave the joystick to my mom, and she started to get the idea and play, and all of a sudden she said, "I can't take it. It's too, you know, the tension is too much. It's too exciting. It's too, I can't." And she ran off into the kitchen, you know, and I kind of realized there for the first time that this was a different experience. The fact that it was interactive, the fact that you were controlling, you were writing the story, you know, even in those days, made it very different from movies, television, other forms of entertainment. And perhaps that was the hook. You know, that was the thing we needed to really build upon, was drawing the player in, making it about their story. And that has continued to be really what's fundamental and essential about computer games, I think.
You write in the book that that moment with your mom is when you realized games were not just a diversion, games could make you feel. And that seems like a really profound and important thing about your games, but about games in general, right?
Yeah, I think they encourage you to invest your entire brain. A game like Civilization is going to exercise your entire imagination. You are interacting with great leaders. You know, all the things you've learned in your life can come into play in a game of Civilization. So yeah, that idea that you're not passive, you're not watching, you're active, you're engaged, you're the star, as we call it, of the game, and it follows the path that you choose, and the outcome is something that you own.
So one of your first professional games in 1982 was Hellcat Ace. And the book gets into this whole origin story and how you met your partner and founded Microprose, and I'll let people get that story from your actual written prose. But one of the things that I thought was interesting about that story is, you know, you guys basically played an arcade game and thought this was cool and said, hey, we could make our own games. At that point, 1982, you knew there's something here, maybe we could make a business, we could make a game and sell it. Did you have any conception that someday this would be a multi-billion-dollar industry, that this would be bigger than the music industry? Or did you think it was just going to be something that maybe could help you pay the bills?
Really had no idea, no expectation that this was going to happen. I just knew that it was more fun to make games than do my regular day job, which was systems analysis for computers. And it was fun. I mean, the arcades were becoming popular, and you know, everybody was kind of getting interested in that kind of thing. So to be able not just play the arcade games, but actually make games was something very exciting. So I would have done it had there been an industry or not. Fortunately, an industry evolved to kind of support my obsession, but it was we called it the Wild West. We had no really idea what was going to happen. We had no kind of genres to guide us into how games should be made. You know, one day we were making a game about pirates, the next day a game about railroads, the next day a game about airplanes and submarines. You know, we kind of make whatever game we wanted because we didn't have these kind of genre conventions, although they have their value. But it was the Wild West in terms of just exploring and trying all sorts of different things. And then the industry grew gradually, and you know, we're still here today. But it's been a heck of a journey.
And in terms of things being the Wild West, you can really see that in those early games. You go from something like Hellcat Ace, which is a fighter and a flying game, to another game you did in 1982 was called Floyd of the Jungle, which was like a simple platform game, right? Kind of like a Donkey Kong, which was big in the arcades at that point. But one of the things I thought was really interesting about Floyd of the Jungle is that it had this very early embrace of multiplayer gaming that was pretty uncommon for games of the time.
Yeah, a lot of our early games were kind of driven by either some hardware trick that we had discovered or some characteristic of the machines that kind of allowed us to do something special and different. Hellcat Ace, I was able to tap into the vertical blank interrupt of the computer and allow the horizon to twist back and forth very quickly to make it feel like you were in an airplane. A special feature of the Atari was that it had 4 joystick ports. So we decided, we should make a game that takes advantage of these 4 joystick ports, which were unique. The Apple didn't have that. The Commodore didn't have that. Only the Atari had that. And we also discovered how to do font animation, where we would print the character on the screen, but kind of behind the scenes, we would change what that character actually looked like. So it was a wiggling snake or a vine twisting back and forth, and the computing power was kind of limited in those days. So by playing these little hardware and programming tricks, we could get cool stuff to happen that people hadn't seen before. And that was really a part of the appeal of some of these games, was just a visual that you had never seen before, because these games were all kind of brand new and pushing the envelope. As we discovered how to do things, we figured out how to make kind of games around those new ideas.
It's interesting to consider how the technical limitations might have affected your game design choices. I mean, you were very early to this idea of multiplayer gaming because the Atari had 4 joysticks, but then you're moving on to the Commodore and Amigas and to PC gaming, where multiplayer was not as easy an option. So like, how much did you find like, boy, I wish we could do another multiplayer game now, but it's real hard to do that for a 286 Windows PC.
That's very true. The limitations of the hardware or kind of the features of the hardware drove a lot of our decisions, but in a way we had plenty of ideas. So every game hadn't been quite written yet. So there were plenty of ideas that would be appropriate for this computer or that computer. The IBM PC actually was the machine that Civilization made sense for. It was more memory, kind of a more serious machine. People that had bought the PC tended to, they're doing some spreadsheets, some word processing, and they're playing games. So the kind of game that Civilization was perhaps appealed a little more to that more in-depth strategy kind of player. But many of our games were kind of influenced by the hardware capabilities. We discovered how to do map scrolling kind of in the middle of our Commodore time. And what would be a fun game to do with a scrolling map? Well, how about a pirate game where you're sailing across the Caribbean? And so in a lot of ways, Pirates was a result of our figuring out how to do smooth map scrolling on the Commodore 64.
So 1987's Pirates is where I wanted to go next. So we see how now the technology is kind of pushing you into these new kind of games because you realize you can do scrolling. But also there's an embrace of different styles of gameplay, right? Whereas a lot of what you've done previously was sort of combat-oriented, flight simulators or platforming. But now you're thinking, there's a line in the book where you talk about pirates didn't spend all day fighting. Pirates had adventures. So you wanted to make this into an adventure game. And this is a new approach for a world where most of the adventure games at this point were like text-based. It was Zork and stuff like that, but you're going to do a graphic adventure game.
Yeah, it was really a our inspiration was movies. That the idea that movies did happen in real time. You kind of cut from one exciting scene to the next, and as you say, pirates had adventures. And what were the kind of components of those adventures? They would be sword fights, ship battles, intrigue, romance. Those are the things we wanted you to spend your time on, not kind of working through a parser or trying to figure out what word this computer is going to understand. So we took a very kind of cinematic approach where every scene was kind of illustrated, jumping back and forth between action sequences, and then the next evolution of the plot, again giving the player the agency to drive the story wherever they wanted to go. You could align with the English or the French or the Dutch. probably not the Spanish, but it was trying to explore this medium and say, you know, can we take some lessons from movies, but allow the player to be the star, the director, the hero, all those, you know, play all those roles really in this adventure.
Another thing that's interesting about pirates is that you're playing a genre that's historically a violent one. You know, pirates in real life were scabrous dogs stabbing each other with cutlasses, but people don't die in pirates. They jump off the boat and things like that. And then one of your next games was Covert Action in 1990, which is probably one of the more quote unquote violent games that you've made. It's sort of a spy story, but again, like, people don't die in Sid Meier games. Can you talk a little bit about like that sort of decision and why you don't want to do excessive gore or violence in your games?
That it's partly our comfort level, I think, and you know, in many ways, in the topics that we chose, it's not necessary. You know, with pirates, we kind of took the Errol Flynn version of what pirating life was like, or what was exciting and interesting about pirates. In Covert Action, you know, it's The Man from U.N.C.L.E. or James Bond, or, you know, kind of, we're trying to bring the fun parts to the player and give them a larger than life experience. It's not, you know, realism is something we bring in a little later to make it seem, you know, more realistic, I guess. But the fun always comes first, and you know, we want the player to feel good about what they're doing, feel good about the story that they're creating. So you know, a lot of violence or people dying, it's just not necessary to the stories we wanted to tell.
Another game from 1990 is when we saw the debut of Sid Meier's Railroad Tycoon, which is another one considered one of your classics. One of the details I thought is interesting in the book is you talk about how you basically invented Railroad Tycoon while you're on vacation. You dragged a desktop computer to the beach with you. Can you talk a little bit about your work habits? I mean, how often do you come up with games like that when you're not working? How important is it to work every day? What is your process for coming up with a new project like that?
Yeah, I'm constantly prototyping. You know, of the games I've shipped, you know, they're probably, for every game I've shipped, there's probably 2 or 3 that I've tried and prototyped and haven't happened. So in this particular occasion, yeah, I did take my computer to the beach, and we had been playing Bruce Shelley's game 1830. It was a board game. We'd been playing it at Firaxis. Oh, I'm sorry, Microprose at the time. And yeah, I mean, I had a little model railroad set when I was a kid, and I thought railroads were cool. And it was the era of SimCity and these kind of, you know, the early days of games where you built things as opposed to you destroying things. And it seemed like an interesting topic for creating something, for this idea of starting very small and then expanding, combining the operation of the railroads with the economics and the stock market. And there are all kinds of, you know, interesting things, but getting it to work efficiently, you know, there's some interesting decisions to be made in that process. And I knew there were a lot of railroad fans out there that this game would appeal to. So yeah, I put a little prototype together on my vacation, came back and showed it to Bruce Shelley. And of course, he was excited because of his history with 1830, and he, you know, immediately gave me all these books and all this information and all these ideas about what I should do with it. And it turned from what I had, which was a little kind of model railroad game, it turned into the history of railroading. You know, that's in large part due to Bruce's influence to kind of, yeah, let's make it bigger, let's make it more epic, let's add more stuff to it. And you know, I think it became kind of set us on the road really to civilization, because it was the first of our, you know, so-called God games or sandbox games or building games. And once we did Railroad, we said, you know, that was fun. What's a even bigger topic we can take on?
Well, that leads right to the even bigger topic, which is the history of the world in Sid Meier's Civilization in 1991. I think probably most of the people on this chat are familiar with the Civ games. Like I said, I've played thousands of hours of them, but one of the things I discovered in the book that was interesting was that it was originally developed with a real-time clock. It wasn't turn-based. It actually ticked along as you were playing.
That's true. A big influence on Civ was SimCity, which kind of runs in that mode that you do some zoning and then you kind of sit back and see what happens and some numbers change and I need to fix this problem over here. Or I really enjoyed playing SimCity, so I kind of, the first thought was, well, just scale that up to a global scale, but what we found was that you spent a lot of time watching and not as much time doing. You didn't really have that investment, that ownership of what was going on. And at a certain point, we switched over to turn-based in part because a lot of us, the folks that were working there, had a background in board games and war games and hex-based games, things like that. So we're comfortable with the idea of moving units around and adding that with the idea of building cities. And then we came up with the idea of the tech tree to guide your evolution through history, but also give you a choice of different paths. I think the tech tree is kind of a great example of what we're looking for, is the possibility for the player to choose a path in one game, but give them other options the next time they want to play. They might want to go down another branch of the tech tree, for example, or make a different decision about how to proceed. So it was, once it became turn-based, and we actually made another game in the interval between when it was turn-based, when it was real-time, and when it became turn-based. We finished Covert Action during that interlude, but everything kind of snapped into place when it became turn-based. And I was always anticipating what was going to happen next. It was kind of like, if I move here, then this will happen. If I move here, if I build a city here, that once you've got the player kind of imagining what's going to happen next, thinking into the future, as opposed to the real time where I was just kind of understanding what just happened. What did I just see? What does it mean? I'm kind of always trying to catch up. With turn-based, you're always anticipating and thinking into the future, and bringing your imagination into play. And even though you play one game, you probably imagined 5 or 6 different possible games as you went through that game. And we started to see the one more turn phenomenon rise, and we were confused and didn't know why we couldn't stop playing, and we actually kind of sat down and said, what's going on here? Why is this game so hard to stop playing? And it was, again, that same idea that the player is always thinking into the future, and there's never a point where all the things that you're trying to get done are completed. By the time one thing is finished, another thing has popped up, another leader to negotiate, another continent to explore, a new technology has opened up this new set of possibilities. So that really leads to the player kind of always wanting to see, that next chapter, that next event, that next thing that's going to happen, and it becomes very hard to not to take that one more turn.
I think that idea that the game is more fun if it's active versus passive is really important. In that you write in the book that other works of art are successful when the performer is interesting, but a game is successful only when the player is interesting. And I feel like that's a big factor in this one more turn phenomenon, is that I'm interesting as a player in this game because it's not simply that I'm Genghis Khan or I'm Julius Caesar. I'm retelling that person's story and I'm making it my own story. I'm looking forward, I'm changing history, like I'm creating my own narrative, and it's about me more than it's really about Julius Caesar. This is not a history simulation. This is creating your own narrative with these historical tools, right?
Yeah, you're doing better. I'm doing better than Julius Caesar. I could, that's an accomplishment. I think you put your finger on it. One of our rules of game design is who's having the fun, making the player the star. lot of times we'll kind of say, this isn't working quite right. You know, what is going on here? Who is having the fun? And sometimes we'll find the designer is having the fun because they threw in this, you know, complicated rule system that they thought was super clever, but is just confusing the player. Or the computer is having all the fun because it's figuring out all these fabulous algorithms that mean nothing to the player. So we want to be sure that the player is having the fun and the player is the star. And that seems very obvious, but there are many times when we'll identify that as the issue, that we have not made the player the star here. We made the designer the star, or the computer is having all the fun.
We are getting some really excellent questions from people in the chat room, and I'm going to get to all those in a moment, but I want to real quick hit on a couple more things with Civ. One of which being that, so Civ, was a huge hit, game of the year, tons of sales, the whole franchise became a big deal. And because of the fact that this was not just simply a game called Civilization, but a game called Sid Meier's Civilization, suddenly this is making you famous, and you've gone from just being like a kid writing your own video games to now being this sort of iconic figure who's coming off of the huge success of a game like Civ. How do you, as a designer, which is a very sort of solitary and often inward pastime, how do you handle that sort of success? How does it affect your creativity? And how do you move on from like, oh, I've had a giant hit to, oh God, what am I going to do next?
Yeah, that's kind of a scary proposition. I think, obviously it's very gratifying to have a hit game that people enjoy playing, and I've gotten wonderful feedback from players. But I kind of made a decision after Civ was successful that I wasn't going to try to immediately do a sequel to it or try to top it, because I'd really poured everything I could imagine into that game. And I took a left turn and did a kind of a project that I thought would be fun, which was CPU Bach. Just another interest of mine was music. So I knew it wouldn't be compared to Civilization. I was guaranteed that these two games were completely different, and it kind of allowed me to not try to continually worry about is this game going to be, how's it going to be compared to Civilization. And fortunately, at the time, Brian Reynolds came along with some great ideas for Civ 2, and it's kind of become the tradition with Civilization to encourage a new designer to bring their ideas to it, because on the one hand, that adds new freshness and new energy to it, and on the other hand, once you've done a Civ game, you're kind of exhausted. You've climbed this pretty high mountain, and you deserve a break. And that's the way I felt after Civ 1, and worked on did some CPU Bach. But it's been it's really allowed me to continue to make games for all these years. Frankly, the fact that Civilization is there, and that that we made that game, and it has engaged the community to such an extent that they've continued to support us and support us through all these years, has really allowed Microprose for Access to appear, to continue to be there, and allowed us to kind of try different things. But Civ has been our core game, and our audience has stuck with us through a number of iterations, and we appreciate that greatly.
The community also becomes important in a different way when we move on to 1996 and the release of Civ 2. So Civ 2, for the first time, it becomes a lot easier and more feasible to mod the game. There are, just text files that an enterprising person can open up and change the details of the game. And this grows into people actually building their own scenarios for Civ. And, in further iterations of the game, it becomes a lot more user-generated. People creating their own scenarios, their own leaders, their own graphics. And how do you think that ability for the audience to change your work, how important has that been to the success of the series? And is it something that you think all developers should consider?
I think in hindsight, it has been a huge part of the success of Civ. In the period between iterations of the game, scenarios will come out, mods will come out, generated by the community. I have to be honest, I was very, very skeptical when Brian said this was going to be a good idea. For Civ 2, my reaction was, we're the designers. We know best. If we give up this power to just anybody, they're not going to need us anymore. If they can make their own games, they won't need us anymore. And Brian really had this vision of the community and how it would evolve, and he wanted to put it on Windows. And I said, Windows, isn't DOS good enough for games? We've been making DOS games for years. But he saw the future. And there's another incident that where Brian, I tried to, I had a little disagreement with Brian, and he turned out to be right one more time. But he had included in the main menu, load game, save game, cheat. You could cheat. You could add units wherever you wanted. You could change the game right there in the middle. And I'm like, Brian, stop that. We've designed this game to be perfect, and now you're gonna let people mess it up by just adding an extra unit here, whatever, 5 tanks or whatever. And but he believed in that. And a short time later, I was watching my son, who was young at the time, play the game, and had this huge smile on his face, just having the greatest time ever. And he said, Dad, look, I just put a whole tank army right here. I said, oh, maybe Brian was right. Maybe this is a kind of a cool feature. But again, the idea of empowering the community to take ownership of not only their, a gameplay experience, but the entire game turned out to be something that was really far-reaching part of the whole game playing experience.
The flip side of that relationship with the community becomes an issue when we start talking about something like 2008's Civilization Revolution, which is where the Civilization franchise for the first time is moving over to console gaming. And this is at a point in time, right, where the PC gaming industry is sort of sagging a little bit, but consoles, Xbox and PlayStation are booming. The PC gaming fans, a lot of them felt betrayed, and they were freaked out. Like, oh my God, Sid's abandoning us. He's going to consoles. They're never going to be the same. So how do you deal with the flip side of that equation with fans and users? Like when they've got complaints and when they're concerned, like how do you not let that destroy your work? But also how much do you let the criticism, how much do you absorb it and take it in and make it constructive?
Certainly we're aware of, and we listen to the criticism or the comments or the suggestions. In a way, it's an indication of how intensely people take the game, how much they believe in it, how much they're invested in it. On the bright side, I think it's we would rather have people be passionate about our game than not care about it. Now we can't please everybody all the time, but part of it is communication. Civ Rev was not something that was going to stop us from making Civilization for the PC. It was introducing it to a new audience that might then move over to the PC, for example, or has had a very healthy life on mobile devices, etc. So we think the kind of the fundamental core concepts of Civilization are applicable to different scenarios, different kinds of gaming, and even different platforms. And that was kind of what Civilization Revolution was an attempt to explore.
So perhaps unsurprisingly, a lot of our questions from the audience have to do with the Sid franchise, and some of them are going from the obscure to the mainstream. But I've been wondering a lot of these myself as a Civ fan, so I'm going to pound just through some of them. For one, Alexander asks, in Civ 2 there were actual video scenes where actors represented the advisors. Why was that idea dropped, and why have there never been those sort of video advisors again in a Civ game?
Well, I think we want Civ to play out in your imagination. I think, when you look at the map and the units, for example, they're quasi-realistic, but they're pretty representational. They allow you to imagine what this world looks like, or what these units look like. So I think, in a way, too much realism takes away your ability to imagine the world the way you want to see it, and presents it in the way that we want to show it to you. So, kind of photorealism or, video realism is almost in a way, I think, too realistic. And Civ depends in large part on you being willing, the player being willing to invest their imagination into what's happening and kind of tell the story in their own mind. So, that would be my answer to that question.
Another question asks about the process of creating the Civilopedia, which I should explain to non-fans of the game is, the inside civilization, you can click into the Civilopedia and find out not only how to play the game, but because you're playing as historical figures, you can find out just, well, who exactly was Alexander the Great, or what exactly was a Hwacha, and how was it used in Korean Wars. So how do you put together that text for the Civilopedia? How do you decide, what the right length is and not just make the whole thing an actual encyclopedia? It's a lot of work for a static piece of media and something that you don't really find in other games.
Well, I think we understand why people would access the Civilopedia. One is to get a little background, but the other is probably to understand how this unit, technology, whatever, is useful or would be applied in the game. So there's a lot of kind of game playing tips involved in the Civilopedia, as well as the historical background information that is people find interesting. But it's really kind of a follow-on from some of our earlier games where the manuals were considered almost as much a part of the experience as the game. In F-15 or Silent Service, F-19, there were 200-page manuals that went along with these games that kind of gave you all this background about what was happening. And a lot of our players really appreciated that. So we carried that idea forward, that it's not just a game. If you want to learn more about something that you're being introduced to, here's a way of pursuing that. And one thought we had with Civilization, we're calling this Civilization, we're trying to give this a lot of weight and heft. And so by adding an encyclopedia to it, there were these reports in the original Civ of the per capita, gross earnings per person, and a lot of things to try to really give it some kind of heft and seriousness. Later we realized that people were just having fun and probably didn't need all that, but the first Civ was kind of trying to feel out this territory of how serious is this, how do we get people to feel that they are actually leading this great civilization? So we try to add things like the Civilopedia and the reports to kind of give you that sense of how important this process was this game was that you were playing.
But while the game is obviously, for fun, and it is a game, it's a serious game in the sense that, like, a lot of people have learned history from this game. There are universities that have assigned it as like history homework. Some of the mods are specifically educational, like play this mod and learn about this particular war. How much is that an equation when you're designing a new edition in the series of, like, do we have to be educational? How do we handle this sort of content? And what do you think of the fact that it's become in some ways an educational tool, even if that wasn't your intention?
Yeah, that was not our intention. It's gratifying to see that. I think that the secret that we learned was that people enjoy learning. They enjoy feeling that they're a little smarter at the end of the game than they were at the beginning of the game. But they want to do that on their own terms. They want to do that for things that they are interested in. They want to feel that they have not only learned something, but used that learning to be better at the game, to win the game. That it's not just learning or being educated for education's sake. It's learning as part of the process of playing our games. So Civilization certainly a good example, but the fact that most of our games are set in real world settings mean that learning is almost inevitable. Even in a pirate game, and playing pirates, a young person told me a story about how they amazed their teacher by how they knew every city in the Caribbean. How do you know all these cities? And then, this person said, oh, well, I played pirates, and you got to know where things are if you're going to play pirates. So there's this, ancillary effect where some learning is going to happen if you play, whether you want to do it or not.
I have sailed into Tortuga more times than I can count. we have several questions naturally asking about the future of the Civilization series, asking if there's going to be a Civ 7. Also, someone is asking if you are looking at virtual reality at all, and if there's a possibility of a VR experience for Civ.
I'm not in a position to announce any future products or future direction for our company. I think you can kind of look at our history and make some pretty comfortable assumptions about what we're interested in and the kind of games that we like to do. You know, we appreciate the support of our community, and they're you know, they've been with us for like it's hard to think, you know, almost 30 years now. The community has supported Civilization, so we, you know, nothing to announce at the moment.
What about more broadly in terms of VR? Like, is that a platform you think is interesting?
I think a game like Civilization is one of the more difficult games to bring to VR. I think, you know, VR is best suited to kind of a first-person experience, an environment where interacting with specific parts of the environment is part of the game. Civ, with its kind of God's eye view of the world, and I don't see that as probably the best use of VR. It's hard, you know, it's hard to say. I was wrong when I told Brian not to put modding in there, so I could be wrong again. But it's something that, you know, we're keeping an eye on, but I don't have anything to announce at this time as far as VR.
You know, this also kind of touches on another question of mine, which is, you know, for large parts of the Civilization series and for all your games, you know, we would get an update in the form of a new game. There was Civilization, then there was Civilization 2, then there was Civilization 3. But now what we see, starting in Civ 5 and now very much with Civ 6, is the base game comes out and it's a whole new experience. It has a lot in common with the previous games. But then you're now able to constantly roll out updates, and some of them can really change the tone of the game. And the current iteration, the current big update to Civ added weather and climate change and some really major mechanics that in the past, that might have been Civ 7, right? Is, oh, now we've got climate. But now you can put those out as updates to the existing game. So I wonder how much that changes your strategy of like, well, let's just do another big update as opposed to let's think about a whole new iteration in the series.
I think it's a reflection of how we have, I think, now come to appreciate how Civ is core to our company, but also how people play the game. You know, what they're looking for, what rhythm are they looking for updates on? You know, what is their pace? When do they kind of get to the point where they've experienced everything that this version has, and they're looking for something new? And instead of us kind of working in these waves where we'd release something and then we'd work on something else and then come back and release another one, Civ is kind of now a full-time part of our scheduling, of our design, of what we're working on. So we can bring out more content, and people are interested. You know, the rhythm of Civ is about a 5-year rhythm basically, but we're now able to bring out things in the interim years to keep the game fresh, to introduce these new ideas that you mentioned. You know, weather and climate and kind of interacting with the earth, one of our recent themes. So it's really a reflection of kind of, we've embraced Civ, I guess, now as like, this is a full-time thing. It's almost got a life of its own. You know, we've got to nurture it. We've got to take care of it. We've got to feed it all the time. We can't just leave it on the corner for a while and then come back to it. So it's a reflection of, I think, of you know, how we really appreciate the value of the franchise to us, and the impact that it has on our players.
Well, as long as we're grilling you about future games, I have to ask, because several people have asked me, why have we never gotten a direct sequel to Alpha Centauri? And is there ever going to be an Alpha Centauri 2?
Well, Alpha Centauri itself was done at a time when Firaxis was published by Electronic Arts, and in the bowels of corporate intrigue or whatever, we don't actually have the rights to make an Alpha Centauri. That's a simple answer. Appreciate the enthusiasm and for the game, and it's certainly one of the games we have great memories of. But it because of the fact that we're now part of this company and we used to be part of that company, and all the the exciting history that you'll read about in this book, that is not a possibility.
So we've got a question from Jesse with the NYU Game Lab, who says, we've just begun the fall semester of American computer games of the 1980s at the Game Center. And the MicroPro's key games we're set to cover are Floyd of the Jungle, Kennedy Approach, F-15 Strike Eagle, Sid Meier's Pirates, F-19 Stealth Fighter, and Railroad Tycoon, which isn't technically in the 80s, but they're slipping it in. If they were going to round that out with another MicroPro's game, what game would you have them include and why?
Well, I think Covert Action had some kind of interesting elements to it. I mean, the vision was a computer-created mystery story that was different every time. It was almost like, make your own mystery, but created by computer. Didn't quite work out that way, but that was the vision of the game, and I thought it kind of tried to go in that direction and demonstrated some of the pitfalls, I think, of trying to do that. You mentioned Pirates and Railroad Tycoon, right? F-19. Oh, I have really warm memories of that game. That was a fun game to make. I think for good reason, NATO Commander was left out of that list, so that's fine. It covers really a lot of the kind of evolutionary games, I think, that we did. I think Silent Service, I'd have to say, I'm pretty proud of that game as well. And the technology we developed there was kind of this fractal-based ability to take this map of the entire Pacific and zoom in step by step until you were looking at individual islands, and you kind of, again, had this whole theater of submarine warfare, but these fun tactical actions that you would do. And it really, I think, was one of the had a great balance of simulation but fun at the same time. It felt realistic enough, but it was fun and easy to play, and so anyways, Silent Service. I put Silent Service in there.
So we do have a lot of young game designers and future game designers on this call. What's your advice for someone who's studying game design right now and wants to get into the industry? What would you say to someone who comes to you for advice?
The answer, the first thing I would say is simple: is make a game. There are tools out there these days that we would have killed for back in the day. But I mean, you're looking at the Unreal Engine and things like that, Unity. There are tools that will give you a great head start in terms of making a game, and kind of let you focus on what's unique about your game idea, what's unique about kind of your point of view, and not have to worry quite as much about the technology and just getting things to work. But it's about making a game, not worrying too much about production values and graphics and sound, and it looking like a movie, but are there interesting decisions to be made? Does it engage the player? Is the player the star? Is it an experience that people kind of want to play one more turn? One of our mantras is feedback is fact. In other words, if people are saying, yeah, it's kind of interesting, but I got bored after about 5 minutes, you can say, no, you totally missed the point. It is fun. You should play some more. No, you need to fix what happens in the first 5 minutes. I mean, the feedback you get is honest, and you can't, you have to accept it and fix what's not working. You can't try to talk people into having fun. You have to provide that fun experience in your game.
We have a question from Marion who asks, what game couldn't you get to work that you most regret as the one that got away? And what aspect of it just didn't work?
There's actually a chapter in the book about the dinosaur game, which was one of those not only single game, but 3 different attempts at the dinosaur game that never actually totally clicked. And I could not imagine that we couldn't make a great game about dinosaurs because they're just so cool and interesting and fun. And what was what was struck me about the journey was we actually tried to apply a number of different genres to dinosaurs. It was first like, what about a turn-based strategy game about dinosaurs? Because we had, Sid in our portfolio. Then we realized that's not really what's fun about dinosaurs. How about a real-time strategy game with dinosaurs? Moving your squad of dinosaurs around. And we kind of came upon this problem that there are no ranged dinosaurs. That part of what makes real-time strategy work is the ability of some units to be melee units and some units to be ranged, and some have a long range but they're vulnerable, and but there's no ranged dinosaurs. And we tried to invent some. They could spit venom maybe, or what? How could we invent a ranged dinosaur? We said, okay, we're just trying too hard here. So we said, how about a card game? Because Magic the Gathering was popular at the time, still is. How about a card game? The post office had actually released a set of stamps with these beautiful dinosaur portraits on it. And we could just imagine each one of those as a card with, attack and defense abilities and special powers. And then you slam a mutation on them, hot blood. You now got hot blood, buddy. Go out there. And we put together a pretty complete card game based on the idea of dinosaurs and having, different terrain for them that would feed them and send them into combat. And we kind of realized, we had basically recreated Magic the Gathering with dinosaurs, and there already was a Magic the Gathering, so we probably couldn't ship that. We said, all right, we're gonna have to leave dinosaurs be for a while, for another few million years, and maybe we'll come back another time and figure out how to do it right.
And I guess a related question would be, are there any games by other designers that you wish you had made?
Well, certainly these days, I wish I'd thought of Minecraft. That's just a brilliant game. I've spent many hours, not billions, but quite a few hours playing Minecraft. Back in the day, it was Tetris. It's like, why didn't I think of Tetris? Oh, I could have written that in about a half an hour, But it was, again, just a brilliant idea, easy to play, but infinitely deep. So yeah, there are definitely a couple of games that I wish I'd written, but I'm overall I'm pretty happy with the games that I did actually write.
Well, unfortunately, we're about out of time, but I wanted to share that one of the fun things about your book is that the book actually has achievements as you read through it. There are achievements in the footnotes. So I wanted to finish up by asking you, what is the achievement that we can grant to the folks who are on this call and in the chat room right now? What achievement have they just earned?
I think you've discovered a new technology, reading books. It's a I think that's the fact that books are, really, again, becoming part of this experience that we're going through is really, really interesting. I have to give credit to my co-author, Jennifer Noonan, for the achievements. She did a great job putting together a lot of the ideas that we talked about. And the achievements are actually something she thought of, and a lot of people have felt that was really a lot of fun. So kudos to her.
Well, it is a lot of fun. The whole book is a lot of fun. I recommend everyone, if you have not already, click the link that Jessica gave out earlier and buy a copy of the book from Greenlight. I want to thank Greenlight and NYU Game Center for putting this together. And of course, most of all, thank Sid for talking for us. And also thank you for these literally thousands of hours of entertainment.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Dave, so much for talking tonight. Thanks, Sid, for the book and for all of this great conversation. Once again, the link is in the chat if you'd like to check out books by Sid and Dave's books as well. And enjoy reading and playing, and have a great night. Take care.